So, Wargaming just released new information about these super battleships. And they released the rules about the new Grand Battle, as they're calling it. So, it's going to be a 9 versus 9, Tier 10 ships, including these super battleships. It's good. They're limiting it to 3 super battleships per team. The Satsuma and Hannover are going to be rented to you, and you'll have to use a resource that I'm not sure how exactly we're going to be gaining that resource, as far as the payout rate of these intelligence reports, but you'll have to use them to enter these grand battles in a super battleship. It says we're going to play tier 9 and 10 ships in the grand battles, so you're going to be the fodder for these super battleships, basically, in order to go play the super battleships, which I guess makes sense. Most people aren't going to be looking to just play into these grand battles and just play a lower tier ship that's inferior, right? So adding these super battleships in has me very, very interested to see what Wargaming's idea or philosophy is for what the ultimate battleship will look like. Is it actually going to be something scary and difficult to take down and really something to be feared on the battlefield? Or is it going to be like current battleships where they're just a free farm and everybody's upset when there's only 2 battleships in the game because there's not enough damage to farm out in their cruisers or destroyers, that kind of thing? I'm curious to see what their thinking is here, if these things are going to be hard to take down or not. I have a feeling they're going to be pretty easy to take down, but I've been wrong before, and I would love to be wrong about this. So let's take a look at the Satsuma first, and they did release the stats for it. So the first thing you're going to notice is the hit points, right? Nearly 120,000 hit points. Satsuma will have the second highest HP pool in the game, next to the Hannover, which we'll get to in a bit. It does get the Shikishima guns, by the looks of it, the 510mm guns, and you get 8 of them instead of 6, with a firing range of 27 kilometers. So a little bit more range, 2 extra turrets. The damage output and fire chance, all that stuff seems to be the same, copied over. So you're just getting an extra turret on your Shikishima at the cost of some reload. One of the best parts about Shikishima, of course, is its fantastic base reload, allowing it to dump out a ton of 32mm Overmatch at a very fast rate. That's the primary advantage of the Shikishima over the Yamato. For example, you get less shells, but you get a little bit more shots per minute, right? And looks like Satsuma is going to be less shots per minute, salvos per minute, compared to the Yamato even. But you do get these big shells, and you get 8 of them now. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. Of course, the 32mm Overmatch is the only real benefit of having guns over 460 millimeters. So I'm not sure how much a benefit it's going to be to have 8 of these shells that deal 19,000 damage over 9 shells that deal 14,500 damage in the Yamato, right? We'll see. I think this ship has potential to be good with these 8 big giant shells. We'll just have to see. Hopefully it'll be a fun ship to play. Looking at the secondaries, they did add some new secondaries here. You don't get the 155 Mogami turrets. You get actually the 203mm Mogami turrets. So you're getting a new secondary mount to the Japanese battleship line. And they go 7.3 kilometers. So that's going to be pretty standard, I think, out to that normal 11-kilometer range. And unfortunately, Japanese battleships did not get a accuracy buff like the German battleships did at the Captain rework in 10.0. So these secondaries, they're going to be pretty useless in my mind. Sure, they've got an impressive fire chance, 17%, and you get a bunch of these 100mm secondaries. Basically, you can think of these as Harugumo turrets, Akazuki turrets, Kitakaze turrets, right? So you get an absolute ton of them. But the problem is, of course, their accuracy is not very good, and their range isn't anything special either. As we know, Tier 10 is pretty campy. I would expect grand battles to be very campy as well. So I'm not expecting much. The positive, though, of having all these 100mm guns is they actually are dual purpose. So your AA is probably going to be pretty fearsome, is my guess. Although we all know that flak is the only thing that really deals damage to planes. So having only 7 explosions in a salvo of flak is not that great, especially considering the range is the same as the Shikishima at 5.8 kilometers. But the Shikishima, of course, gets this amazing 10 flak bursts per salvo. So your AA is likely going to have a little bit, it seems to have more DPS, but less flak. And DPS is not what you're going for. You're going for these flak bursts. You're wanting to buff your flak. You're wanting to add more flak to your AA. That's what really takes down planes quickly. That's where you get those big chunky hits of thousands of damage instead of these little ticks of hundreds, right? That's what we're looking for here. So unfortunately, the AA is not going to be great. So expect to struggle versus aircraft carriers. Your ship's going to be big. It's going to be less maneuverable, as we're about to get into, and very easy to target as for an aircraft carrier, assuming there's carriers in this game mode. I still haven't really seen anything on that, what ship classes are allowed, and I'm assuming they're going to allow aircraft carriers. So maximum speed, 27 knots, pretty standard. Turning circle radius is bigger than the Yamato, right? And the Shikishima at over a kilometer. Rudder shift time is worse at 22 seconds. It's around Montana levels. Oh, poor Montana. But yeah, your rudder shift's not good. Your surface detect is not good. Of course, at 18.5 kilometers. And yeah, you're not firing your guns in smoke. So this ship is going to be very easy to see and very easy to hit for basically everyone. So hopefully the armor is going to be something that is decent on this ship. You do get damage control party, repair party, fighter, or spotter. I'm assuming we're going to be running fighter if there's aircraft carriers, and of course you'll run spotter if there's no aircraft carriers. Given this really bad flak value and how big your ship is, you're going to be priority target number 1 for any aircraft carrier. So having a fighter to lock on to the planes as they go over, right? Of course, fighters aren't going to stop your first drop, but what they do is they lock on to the aircraft as they go over your ship and shoot down as many planes as are in the squadron of fighters. And hopefully that's enough to deter multiple drops, right? That's what a fighter is there for. It's not to stop the first drop, it's to stop multiple drops, hopefully. As for armor on the Satsuma, you're going to probably have just basic Yamato armor just stretched out a little bit. I would expect the superstructure is going to be bigger based on the image we saw, and you're just going to have a stretched out ship. And so that means you're probably going to have the same 50mm deck on the very front and back, 57mm right near the superstructure. And of course, the massive weakness of the whole Yamato class is having 32mm upper belt armor. This is easy pens for HE and easy overmatch for other Yamato class ships. That's why angling in a Yamato, you can't really show like this. Of course, we'll get to the cheek, but any Yamato shells that hit here, anything that overmatches 32mm, which includes Hannover now, they're going to just overmatch right through this upper belt. So this is a massive weakness on the Yamato class, and a buff that they could do to this class, or at least for these super battleships, right, is to maybe make the Satsuma have this be 38mm, somewhere in there, to at least bounce some more AP, and maybe shatter a little more HE as well. Of course, we've got the massive problem of this kind of octagon-ish citadel, half of an octagon being here, and it's incredibly easy to citadel these ships right here. And even ships that don't overmatch 32, when you're at this angle, enough to get your back turret off. If you're able to shoot your back turret, you will get citadeled through here. Of course, if you overmatch 32mm, you can do it at any angle, making these ships pretty bad at close range. So that's what I would expect out of the armor. It's probably just going to be this ship taken into Photoshop, stretched, add a turret. That is what I'm assuming it's going to be. which is not great. Yamato is not known for having the best of armor schemes, but hopefully the higher HP pool is going to help it out. That's it for the Satsuma stuff. Just looking at this picture, though, the ship looks pretty incredible, pretty menacing, and I'm curious to see how the secondaries work out. As you can see, we've got those pretty cool-looking Mogami 203s on there. The superstructure, though, does look really big, so as a person who occasionally brings out the HE spammers, that looks like a pretty juicy target. So I'm a little nervous about the survivability of these ships, even given their massive HP pools. Remember, fires, of course, deal percentage damage, so the more HP you have, the bigger that number is that each fire is doing. So now for the Hannover. This ship just looks awesome, man. And the stats they released, well, you're a big ship, having 126,500 health. That's a lot. And, well, as we just talked about with fires, you're probably going to chew through that relatively quickly. Having 483mm guns means you're the first battleship that's not Japanese that's overmatching 32mm of armor, which is a big deal when you're fighting other battleships. You got to keep that in mind. It's a big advantage, and why Yamato stays relevant for so long, given that it hasn't had really any buffs. It's had actually some nerfs to the armor, and specifically its torpedo belt over the years, but it's still a very good ship. To note, you get 21.4 kilometers of range, so less than the Satsuma, but that's okay, because this ship is probably going to be more of the brawling focused one, just like the other German battleships. Not that that's the easiest thing to do, or something that is really recommended by the meta. If you're just taking a look at how things work for battleships, you kind of have to snipe. Even with Deadeye being gone this week, actually, people are still going to snipe, right? So getting into these brawling ranges is going to be really difficult for this ship, but I'm hopeful that these main guns are going to make up for that. Of course, that's the big problem with the Kurfürst, is it has little guns at tier 10, and everything has 30mm of armor that, of course, bounces your shells. So having these shells that deal 17,300 AP damage and overmatches 32 is hopefully going to help that out. The problem, of course, is going to be dispersion. Like any other American battleship, you only get 1.8 sigma. The dispersion, I haven't checked at in detail, but of course we know the German battleships are on the same dispersion table as the American battleships and the British battleships, for that matter, not including Thunderer, but just the normal British battleships. They all have the kind of same dispersion curve. Of course, the sigma on the German battleships is worse, meaning the tendency for the shells to go to the middle is worse. But you do get a 30-second reload time, so you have a better reload than the Satsuma, and probably worse dispersion and worse range and worse alpha. But the hope is that you're getting into these brawling ranges, your secondary armament being, again, 12.5 kilometers, right? Just like the GK is going to do some work for you, hopefully. They say 128 millimeters here, but they don't actually look like the normal 128 millimeters that are on the Kurfürst and the Gneisenau and the Odin. They look more like, I don't even know, maybe a new turret. They talked about in the Waterline episode that they were going to be dual purpose 127 millimeter guns, so maybe this is just a typo. But regardless, having these secondaries, you got a lot of them, right? And them going out to 12 kilometers, having not the best fire chance, but alpha, and of course the ability to pen 32 millimeters as well. That's the positive side about these secondaries on the German battleships, is the 128 millimeter secondaries pen over 32 millimeters, giving you more full pens against battleships and other cruisers. The AA, of course, is probably going to be a problem on this ship because it's German, and, well, we actually see that it's not as bad as the Satsuma, and that's because you get 9 flak bubbles, and that's enough that it might actually be more dangerous for a CV to come target the Hannover than it will be for it to target the Satsuma, which is the exact opposite of the Shikishima versus the Kurfürst. Kurfürst being very vulnerable to aircraft carriers because it doesn't really have much flak, it doesn't have a lot of DPS, and yeah, it's a very large ship with horrible turning rate. Speaking of large ships with horrible turning rate, Hannover being one of the worst turning ships in the entire game. You get a slightly better rudder shift than the Satsuma, but your turning radius is much, much, much worse. I don't know off the top of my head what aircraft carrier turning circle radius is, but it actually could be that Hannover is the worst ship in the entire game for its turning circle. Which would make sense because it is so massive, right? Of course, you have really bad detection at 19 kilometers, so you're not going to be running up stealthily in this ship. And that's probably okay. Of course, you get the damage control party, repair party, fighter or spotter, and hydroacoustic search. You're probably going to run spotter, even if there's carriers. 21.4 kilometers really isn't enough range at tier 10 these days, and I'm assuming that in these grand battles it won't be enough range either, because people are likely going to be camping near the back of the map even more in this kind of game mode. Of course, there are real positives that the German battleship armor brings to the table, right? At tier 10, you're one of the only battleships that is basically entirely safe from Yamato Overmatch, 32 millimeters of Overmatch. You get this incredible 60 millimeter armor belt that goes way higher than any icebreaker, right? Icebreaker is more around this line. It's twice the height, and at the front it even ticks up a little bit. So a Yamato shooting at you, especially at close range, it's going to kind of have to hit these little parts here, and oftentimes with dispersion it'll go low or high and just miss. So you're not getting citadeled, you're not getting penned through the bow by any 32 millimeter Overmatch, which for Hannover will be a big bonus because all the super battleships in this grand battle will have the ability to do. So there's only this tiny little bit of 32 millimeter plating. So having the ability to bounce a lot of these battleships that are used to just overmatching everything is very nice. 50 millimeters of deck armor, of course, is awesome, right? You're shattering a lot of HE. You're bouncing AP. It's wonderful. Upper belt 150. If you angle it properly, bouncing again. Of course, the problem with having thicker upper belt is you're going to get less overpens when people shoot at you here. It's going to arm a lot more AP than 32, 38 millimeter upper belts will. And of course, the biggest issue with the German battleships is the superstructure. Look at this. I would say tumor would be the best way to put it. Because, well, we all know what happens when a Kurfürst decides to angle itself, right? So the big problem, of course, when you angle is the superstructure. We all know this, and here's a perfect example of dying very quickly in an angled Kurfürst, right? I'm not getting greedy for my back guns. I am not even getting that greedy for my secondaries here. This timer started the first at the first bit of damage that I took. Montana gets a double fire on us with his secondaries somehow. Pretty rough RNG. Of course, dying in this amount of time, you do have to get screwed by RNG a little bit, or a lot. But I just want this clip to just show you what happens when you have a ship that has horrible superstructure size. And when people can just do massive, massive damage through it. And there we go. Instantly out of double fire again. I think the Montana's main guns lit one on my superstructure. Secondaries instantly got one on my bow. So we start our heal, right? We're managing our heals quickly, right? We're not waiting for a full heal. We know we're going to take a bunch of damage, and we're healing through it as best we can. Of course, I'm getting overwhelmed here, right? No battleship should be able to stand up to this, but I was just shocked how quickly I actually did die in this scenario. in an angled battleship, not getting greedy, making sure that I stayed angled to everyone, and I still died so fast. So Hannover is going to be like this, but bigger and easier to hit and easier to kill, and a bigger superstructure entirely. So when I say that it's a more brawling focused ship based on its secondaries, based on its gun range, it can't really brawl because look at how fast I died. Minute 53. And I was angled the whole time. Imagine if I go broadside to get some of my guns off, for example. We all know the turret angles aren't very good on these ships, and I'm assuming for Hannover, it's going to be much the same. And you can see in this picture how massive the superstructure is. It looks even bigger than the Kerfur's superstructure. So I think that the Hannover is going to be a very frustrating ship to play. You saw in that clip how much damage I took from armor piercing to the superstructure. It arms AP shells, and you get 15 to 20,000 damage hits through the superstructure. It's just not fun, right? To take that much damage when you're angled. And that's how people are telling you to play your battleship. Push in, angle, tank the enemy team. That's not how battleships can play. They're not designed to tank in this game because they die so fast. So with all that said, I'm still excited for this game mode. I just have a cautious optimism about it, and I'm assuming that it's going to just be more camping, sniping battleship gameplay. So that's why the Satsuma is a little more interesting to me than the Hannover, just because you don't want to get baited by secondaries into pushing in your ship and dying very, very, very quickly. I'm assuming this game mode is also going to be very campy and boring, just like Tier 10 often can be. And really, the mid to late game is going to be the only fun part if you manage to keep your ship healthy enough to the point where the fight ends up taking place within 15 kilometers. Unfortunately, I don't think that's how it's going to go. So these grand battles, I think, probably won't get played that much, especially with the way Tier 10 is right now and being able to just constantly guarantee your top tier and farm from the back of the map with your HE spammer or even battleships, right? Just sniping from the back, not really risking much. So I'm excited to try it. There's going to be videos on the channel, of course, about these battleships and how best to play them and how I enjoy playing them and some fun games that I have in them. But I wouldn't expect this game mode to be the most fun thing all the time, right? There'll be exceptions, and those will be likely the games that I show, the exceptions that are incredibly fun. But after looking into the stats of these ships, I think they're just going to be an easy farm for a lot of the Tier 10 cruisers that already exist. So thank you guys for watching my thoughts on these new battleships, looking at the stats with me, and yeah, I hope you have a great day.